we should be live. Just check the audio's on. Great. Good evening, folks. I see we've got a couple of viewers. Hello. As you can see, this is going to be a lesson on music theory, on modes of the major scale. I'm Gavin Taylor for GT Dobro Lessons Online. If you've got any questions, do drop them on the chat or message me privately. Yeah, so we're going to be looking. Oh, excuse me. It's not the virus. It's a random sneeze. I've been well cooped up in my my little place here with occasional trips out. So we'll be looking at it on the Dobro, and we'll be using a couple of resources to go through that. As usual, I'll be using guitarscientist.com, this site. 1, 2. There we're back. Sorry about that. Some technical glitch threw my audio off. Anyway, we're back. And do try and message me if for any point there's some kind of technical glitch. I can't monitor the live feed going out because it's delayed and I won't hear things in real time. So we'll be using, I'll just repeat there, I've got guitarscientist.com. You can navigate through to the chart generator on that. But I'll show you through that. We'll be creating the charts for that today with that. And this application, iReal Pro. That's really just for backing tracks because I want to create 7 sort of different backing tracks today to play along with, to run through the ideas. So the tuning on the Dobro we'll be using will be GBD. But let's dive in, and we'll go across to guitarscientist.com and get orientated around that. Let me just cue up that shot. It's the wrong shot. Where did I do it on? I think I did it. Yeah, here. Well, in fact, I'll just put the full shot up. Take that title off. Oh, wrong camera. And we'll just orientate around this. I'll just put myself in a little box, as that may or may not help. So on this site, let's get the right mouse. If I just get rid of this bit, I'll just go back. I'll navigate you through to finding the starting point for this, because we'll be running through building the charts in the lesson. And it'd be wise if you can. Obviously, if you can't, I haven't got a secondary device to be able to run through this on. The site does work on some tablets, but it's a bit clunky. So it's definitely a kind of safety bet to do it on a desktop. Hopefully, while I was whittering away, you see that you get to the home site. And then it's this Guitar Scientist tab. Oops, let's just, you can't see it because my big pus is in the way. So up here, you can see my mouse here. You've got Home, About Me, and guitarscientist.com. And then we've got this Guitar Charts Editor. It is that we'll be using. Sorry, this is just keeping going to the wrong shots. So when you're on this page, you just scroll down. And it's this interface we're going. So you go to the editor, and you come up with a page exactly like this. There's a big donation button. I would suggest that you make a small donation to the man who made this, as it's an invaluable resource for anyone learning any open tuning a fretted instrument. It's an incredible resource to be able to learn on in terms of laying out fretboard diagrams. Absolutely wonderful. So quick orientation around here. Down the bottom we've got fretboards. It brings up a big interface like this. We can widen the fretboard or alter the type of fretboards they want. I'm going to make it 14 frets today. Going to keep the width as they are, add the heights. I'm going to pop on captions down the bottom. So we've got a little labeling system down the bottom of that. And then the next thing we're going to deal with is our tuning, so that we can map in what we're dealing with here. I'll just put everything, so I've enlarged the screen here just so that we see things nice and clear on the page. So we've got 6 strings, but we're going to obviously alter the tuning. If you're working on a 8-string instrument or anything other, you can alter this to map whatever tuning you've got, which is invaluable. So I can just get this interface to move where I want it. Obviously, I'm working in GBD today. If you're working on another tuning and you're following this resource, it will be the same, obviously, just with different fretboard markers. The diagrams will look different. The instruction to go through and how to look at the modes will be the same. We'll certainly be making the same sound orientations. That's what the modes are about. So I'll come on to the description of the modes once we get set up. Okay. It's important to get this bit of the thing. So here we can see our fretboard is all shaded out now with the correct names. Okay, it says GBD, GBD up the back there, and it's got all our notes labeled in there. Okay, so we've got a thing set up there. So let me just start off this process by mapping in a major scale and discussing modes relative to that. So I hit 1 on what I know C to be B. Don't worry too much about this, because this is just me preparing something for discussion, so that we can work on it. And you can see here that this scale thing brings up a thing with what we call intervals. If you don't really understand intervals yet, I'd definitely do some research on that. On my Patreon site, we've got a good sort of hour-long lesson just on intervals, and another 2 hours, or coming up 3 hours, about chords and major harmony, major scales. Suffice to say, for a major scale, we'll be going through lots of intervals today. It's just we won't have time to really break down, if you're unfamiliar with intervals, to go through that. So this is what the major scale is going to be in terms of interval structures. We've got a root, a second, a major third, a perfect fourth, a perfect fifth, a major sixth, and a major seventh. Notice fourths and fifths get referred to as perfect because together they add up to an octave. Everything else is referred to as major if it's just a straight number. I'm going to hit generate, and we'll take it from here. So we've got a major scale there. Okay. Now the question that's abundant to anyone that's not clear on modes here is, what the hell are they, and how do they relate to this basic thing that I might have learned called a scale? Well, you can see I've laid it out here with numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can change that in the notation to note names down here, and that puts everything to note names. I'm leaving it on intervals, and that will be the most valuable for us today, especially if you're working on other instruments. In any way, just getting your head around intervals and how to work around them will be the most valuable part of working on today's lesson. Okay, so what you should know is a major scale starts tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. And that's what is laid out on this instrument, the relationship between all these numbers. What you'll notice is there's always a tone between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3, a semitone between 3 and 4, and a tone between 4 and 5, 5 and 6, 6 and 7, and a semitone getting back to 1. Okay, that's all our major and perfect intervals. Okay, so if I was to play along with that, I've got a chart here for C major, and I'll just orientate around the other shot that we'll be using, which I believe is not that one. The 3 shot, I think. Yeah. Okay. So this app here is iReal Pro. It does cost, but it's really helpful for practice, learning tunes, all sorts of things. I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on the application today. What I will be doing is playing it. So I'm going to just change this backing track to play in a bluesy style. And I'm going to go for slow-mo, which is very slow, 40 BPM. It's just off the edge of the screen there. I'm going to make it repeat loads. And I'll go around the sound of this major scale. Everybody should be very familiar with it. so we've got essentially that major sound. If I just chop to the other side, the shot that I made up, that one, you can see me how I'm working relative to the fretboard. So here's my 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, major 7. You can play that in different places. I can play the major 7th down here. This lesson isn't really going to be about how you play through them entirely on the dobro and scale positions. The next position. There's nothing there that should be challenging to anyone's perception of music there. Okay, it's all what we expect to hear, something just of a major chord. I've played a major 7th chord there to include this major 7th interval in that. So it's the major scale, but it's also what we call the first mode, and it's what I've labelled up here as Ionian. Now my spelling sometimes off when I do this quickly, so sometimes I might spell things wrong. Okay, but that's our Ionian. It's important to get the basic principles of that correct. Okay, because all these other modes are based upon that scale, and it's a bit like saying you've got this. I don't like the analogy myself because you never get one. Imagine you have a 7-sided building or a 7-sided object that's large enough to see from different sides. It's the same object, but you're going to see it from 7 different perspectives, and that's kind of an analogy for what modes are. They're the same scale. That's why this is called modes of the major scale, not modes of any other scale. When we start that scale from a different position, we get a different characteristic about that scale. Some of them are very normalized to our ears, and so we tend to not think of them maybe as modes. You go, oh, that's just the minor scale. Minor scale's a mode of the major scale. You might think, oh, well, I'm playing over G7. I play a flat 7. That's a mode of the major scale. It's just you might not have a joined up perspective on linking them up all together. Certainly I've been playing for a long time self-taught before I was able to really, or willing to kind of accept the orientation of what modes were. So back to the Aerial Pro, but not the Aerial Pro, the other shot that I'd made here. Helpful if I could remember which one it was. So there's this shot there, okay, and what we've just generated here is this major scale. I'll just name it major or Ionian, and that's our major scale. Okay, I'm going to add another fretboard, and we'll move on to the onto the next mode. Okay, so adding a fretboard, it's just down here. Hi, Canula again. Nice to see you all here. Hi there, can you tell me about the app you are using there? So the app here, if I cut back, this app here is iReal Pro. You can find it on the app stores on Android and the what's the Apple one? The iStore, Apple Store. It does cost now. I bought it absolutely years ago and got it for a couple of quid, and now it's maybe more like 10, 12 euros. There's add-ons, and I'd suggest the Blues add-on is really good for playback files. And it allows you to generate, edit, transpose, do all things related to charts. So it will play back any chord creation that you put into it in a variety of predefined algorithms, so various styles. And then you can mix them and do all sorts of things. But it's an invaluable kind of practice tool and teaching aid. Okay, so back to what I was doing, which was to go on to the first mode. So let me just make sure that we're on the right thing there. There we go. So I'm going to click Add a Fretboard and make sure that we can see that fretboard. Okay, so there's a nice clean fretboard. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I've got my major scale up here. Now I'm going to click this root select, and I'm going to click on the same position that number 2 says here, because this is the first mode. Irrelevant of what numbers it says, a new fretboard defaults to A as 1. A as its kind of orientation. The app needs to know this, sorry, the website, not iReal Pro, what 1 is. Okay, so in this case, I want it to think of D as the root, not C. I've done C, C major. This is going to be the second mode. You can see it shaded out to make there. This is the second mode, and it's called Dorian. Okay, if you haven't gone through the chords, the 7 major chords in a system, this follows the same pattern. You get major, minor, minor, major, major, minor, diminished as basic triads. The chord types, the scale types follow that characteristic. In terms of broad, are they major, minor, or diminished? We get no augmented in the major scale. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my chord generator here, and rather than putting in the intervals, I'm going to use one of the aspects about this site that makes it a really helpful site for tuition or for learning by yourself. If I click this top bit up here, select your structure, it tells us a little bit about the characteristics that we're working through today. Okay, there we go. Up the top, it's got various overlays that it can predefine for us. So here we go, Ionian, that's our major scale. If I click that, it's done just what we did. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Those are all the interval structures of the major scale. The next mode, which is just starting on the second degree of the scale, rather than starting on C, starting on D, this is the second perspective, if you like, of our building. You're looking at that scale from one step further in, or hearing it from one step. And you can see suddenly our intervals are changing, much as they would do for the second chord. If you haven't done triads in a major scale, that's another lesson to qualify, to ensure that you've got your bearings on. So this one has got a second, same as the major scale does, but it's got a flattened third, because it's a minor scale. Minor scale is going to have, or minor chord, it's got to have a minor third. In this case, this is D, E, and F that we'll be looking at. So still, there's no sharps or flats in any of this. It's just starting on a different note from the C scale. Okay, then we've got a fourth, a fifth, and a sixth, just the same as the major scale. So, but we do have a flattened seventh. Okay, so that's the interval guide for that scale. If I just click on Generate Scale, we've populated our fretboard, and now we've got it. Okay, so I'll label this Dorian. Now, in terms of a quick reminder of interval structures, what I'd put down this as a reminder is just throwing down on this bit what isn't major or perfect. Okay, so I know it's going to have a 1. In this case, it's got a 2, a major 2. So I'm just going to put down anything that's flat. So you know the intervals that are not major or perfect. So I know that this has got a flat 3. It has to do. So I'm going to map that in. Now, other things that I know it's got into it, it's got flat 7, not flat 6, flat 7. Okay, so it's got these 2 flattened intervals. Okay, and that's the definition of our mode. It's 1, 2, flat 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. Now, you could apply it anywhere on any instrument, and you will get the Dorian scale. Okay, now, yeah, it's a minor scale, but it's got a major sixth. We'll come on to see what they are first. So on this iReal Pro app, remember which shots I've got set up here. Totally forgotten which shot that was. 4 shot? It was 3 shot. If I cut to this, I'm going to select my Dorian chart. And what you'll see here is that rather than D minor 7 or just D minor, I've made the backing track include this sixth. Why? Because on each backing track, I'm going to try and put in the qualitative characteristic of that chord. So for instance, we get 3 major chords, and 2 of them are pretty much the same. But we're going to try and highlight any distinctions we've got in them. We've got 3 minor chords in our major key. So I'm going to try and highlight the distinctions in those 3 different chords that we can identify these different modes, these different characteristic sounds. In this case, one of the things we can do to do that, or one of the specific characteristics that we can see about it, is, or you might not know that yet, but it's got this major sixth. It's the only one of our minor modes in the major scale that's got this major sixth. So although I've written flat 7, flat 3, those aren't the orally characteristic differences from the other minor modes. Those are just the flat intervals relative to being able to describe the scale relative to the major scale. So it's got a major 6. In fact, I could put that in brackets. It's got a major 6th. Now that's of only value once you understand that all the other minor scales don't. They've got a flat 6th. Okay, so I'll just do the same thing with that. Oh, I've left this on Gypsy Jazz. It's remembered that, and I've got it playing at 180 BPM. I'll just pep that along to repeat forever. And I'll play a little bit, and then we'll go over the scale diagram to get myself lined up here. So that's me playing a B. B is the 6th. Here's the triad. Here's the 6th. That's the sound. Okay, so I'll cut the shot so that we can see both diagrams together. This one. Okay, so I'm just going to work from, say, this D here. 1, 2. In fact, I'll work up here so that it's a bit more in the middle of the fretboard. I'll start from this 1 here. So this is D on the fretboard, 5th and 7th fret. Okay. So I'm going to go back from my 2, up from my 3. There's my 4, 5. I'm going to go up from my 6th, back from my flat 7. So I could play this exactly the same as the major scale. There'd be no difference. Like when I played the major scale, I started here from what is now the flat 7. It's just D is now the root center. D is that modal center. Okay, around the same scale. So I could just play the same scale pattern and or even know that I'm starting on D, or I could play it in a different scale pattern. Still the same intervals. So I know that the backing track can get quite tedious with these MIDI sounds, but it's very quick and easy to work with. So that's the characteristic of our mode 2. Okay? So that's mode 2 of the major scale. Let's cut back to our... I should really put this so that I can look at both things at the same time. Oh, it was a 2-shot. It was that picture-in-picture shot. Okay, so we've done up to our mode 2 Dorian. Okay, so it's the second one. Now what you should hear is that major 6th. That's its real characteristic. It's very, very useful to get used to listening to minor modes and being able to distinguish between the natural minor and primarily Dorian. The mode we're about to come on to is the most tense of the minor modes. Okay, it's the 3rd mode, and it's called Phrygian. So let me get a new fretboard added in here. Again, it's for any instrument that you're working on that's got frets and strings. We could adjust the tuning to it. Any given page you're working on all has to be the same tuning, and you're either showing intervals or names on that one chart. So we've got our 3rd diagram. In this case, I'm wanting E, so I'm going to select any E's that I see. In this case, as we're moving on, it's always going to be whatever is 2 relative to the previous diagram. In this case, it's E. It's C, D, E. E is the 3rd degree of the major scale. I could go back and label this one D Dorian. This one's got an odd spelling. E, Phrygian. Okay, and we'll just see what interval structures come up there. So again, to apply the modes on this, we hit scales, and it says arpeggio generator because we can do anything to do with applying a set of intervals. We can work with this. Okay, you can limit also. I didn't discuss this. You can limit what part of the fretboard you want it to apply for. Leaving it blank as what I've been doing applies it to the full fretboard for the diagram. but you could apply any specific section. Anyway, not primarily just going to stick to the orientation of the site. It's just helpful to describe the tools as we're going along. Okay, so I've selected this Phrygian. Now, did I manage to spell it right? No, I missed a Y. I put an I. So that's my classic dyslexia kicking in. I've done this so many times, and yet somehow the spelling of this word escapes me. Anyway, so we can see the interval structure about this one here. A 1, it's always going to have a root. A flat 2, well, you say it's always going to have a 1. Some scale structures you might be omitting the root and working around it. In this case, for our modes, we're always including 1. That's whatever note we're starting on. Okay, so this is going to have a flat 2. This is starting the C scale from E, so we're going E to F, a semitone. That's a flat second, a semitone. Okay. Then we've got a flat third. It's a minor mode. It's got to have a flat third. Still got a perfect fourth. Okay. Still got a perfect fifth. But we've got a flattened sixth. Like I say, all the other, apart from Dorian, the other minor modes all have flattened sixths. This is all the minor modes of the major scale. Okay, so a flattened sixth and a flattened seventh. Okay, so we've got what 4 flats. 1, 2. Yeah, so we got 2, 3, 6, and flat 7. So let's generate that. It populates our scale. And under here, I'm just going to do as we had done before. So it's got flat 3. Oh, sorry, first one is flat 2. It's got flat 3, flat 6, and a flat 7. Okay. That's everything else is, I could put in 1, 2, all the normal numbers in there as well. Okay, so the thing to say about this mode is that it's a very difficult one to get centered on. If you just play over E minor or E minor 7 in the background, this flattened second is always a super tense interval to make work. So having an appropriate kind of orientation on a backing track that's just going to make the listener orientate to the right characteristic. All of these modes will sound correct and normal in the right context. So learning to apply them appropriately is the key. If they're not sounding correct to you, it's about learning what is it in those modes that you need to concern yourself with to make the right, say, backing track for it, or to pull out the right harmony in it. So I'll go back to this iReal Pro chart. Which was the 3-shot, I believe. Yeah, in there. Okay, and I shall go to my Phrygian. That I've done this with an I as well, and it should be a Y. Maybe I'll remember now that I've done this lesson with it. I'm just going to refresh that camera as it's just stuck. Refresh them both. And that's messed up my shot. There we go. Coming back. So, what you can see I've done here is, rather than on the other 2 modes, I just programmed it to do that chord going along, because there was nothing nothing complex about playing the mode over the top of it. There was no particular interval relationships in that needed something more sophisticated in it. Now we've got flat and second in that one, and that's a difficult one. So to orientate specifically over a minor chord, that our ear is attuned to just hearing a normal minor chord. Our ear is adapted to that. So hearing a flat and second over it, well, that needs some like I say, some finesse, something in there to orientate the ear. So what you can notice here on the second bar of this, I've put it going up to F, up that semitone jump between the flat and third and the fourth. So flat 3, up between the root and a flat and second, E to F. Okay, so it's a common kind of chord progression that you might get in a Phrygian characteristic, something, a minor chord and up a semitone to a major chord. Usually maybe only for a section, but there's 1 or 2 songs that might use that as its modal kind of center ground. Okay, so it's never, another thing to say about this is that these idea of modes means it never needs to go back to the root, back to the major perspective. It never needs to go to C in a modal music, which is broadly into the word mode. Well, I'll put that aside. There's a whole pile of linguistics of how different cultures in music use the word mode or modal. We'll put that aside, and we'll just hear how the track is going to go. I'm going to change this one to play stacks because I like that. It's a bit of an odd chord progression to play in this style. You shall hear it. And here's the step up. So I'll just swap back to the other shot and just let this repeat a while. And okay, so here's our mode at the bottom there, and I'm going to pick a root. Again, I'm going to stay away from this end of the fretboard. I'll start from this E here. So there's my triad, root, third, fifth. You can see, follow it on the diagram. 1, 3, 5, 1, 3. Flat second. And it's resolved. That sound at the end of the chart. The chart knows that it's programmed in C, so when it stops, it always plays a C root at the end of these things, which is maybe a bit of a failing in the app. But yeah, it's largely... you know, if you were programming it to do with something more sophisticated, you could adapt to that. Okay, so I'll just run through our scale from this, so maybe 5. There's that 5 flat 6, and that's a more traditional minor characteristic. We'll see that in the natural minor scale of 5 and flat 6. But this, that semitone from the root up from the chord 3, that's our Phrygian mode. And if I didn't have that F in the backing track, that little motion, if that wasn't there, the sound that I'm playing wouldn't be supported, and it would just sound wrong. You'd hear this flattened second, and the more I can play it more convincingly, maybe, and try and enforce that on the listener, the intent of it, and sometimes that's enough, that the melodic player's intent is enough to orientate everybody. But with this backing tracks, it's not going to sophisticatedly add anything in to respond to that. So I've put it in so that it's abundantly clear of that positioning, that little semitone step. Okay. So again, that's our Phrygian mode. And let's cut back to picture in picture. So that's our mode 3, Phrygian. And let's just change the spelling, as we now know, as I should be learning to adapt. I probably will remember that now. Okay, so there's our third mode, Phrygian. Okay, it's got 1, flat 2, flat 3, perfect 4th, perfect 5th, flat 6, flat 7. So add in another fretboard. You can only add in 7 on this. Okay, so luckily we got 7 modes. That's great. Add fretboard, and we're done with that. Okay, so we're up to mode 4. Okay, that's called the Lydian mode. Not spelled like that, that's for sure. And it's F Lydian in this case. Okay, so mode 4 is so if you think of remember orientating around these is the same relationships to thinking through the 7 chords in a scale. Chord 1 is major, chord 2 is minor, 3 is minor, 4 is major, 5 is major, 6 is minor, and 7 is diminished. Those are the triads, not adding in the 7ths yet. But the scale type or the position is the same. Therefore, you're going to have a major type of scale on 1, 4, and 5, a minor type of scale on 2, 3, and 6, and a diminished type of scale on chord 7. That's not, those scales are notice I said type of, not just the same, because they've all got variants. Okay, so let's use the app to the website to add in our F Lydian. First thing we do is tell it what root we're wanting to work from. I'm wanting it to work from F. Okay, and as I say, in this kind of series, whatever is the flat 2 up here, or the 2 relative to the scale we've done, we're just ascending up one place. Okay, so I know in this case that I'm wanting this note here. Now ignore the numbers that we're seeing here, okay, but the position from the fretboard. Okay, this is F, I know that. It's also where the flat 2 is up here on the D string at the 3rd fret. There we go. But any of them would have done. Okay, so now I know that the app is thinking, all right, the website's thinking F is my root structure. That's the position that I'm going to apply the algorithm to. Okay, so I'm going to go to my scale generator. I'm going to drop down and I'm going to apply Lydian. And we'll see its numeric characteristic. Okay, so you'll notice here that it's just like the major scale, but with one alteration. Okay, I'll leave it at that for just now, but there's a helpful rule of thumb for major and minor scales further down the line from that. So what you should see is the only distinction on this, and it's a bit of a problem with the app, which we'll correct in just a second, is that it's this interval here. It's also got a flattened fifth. So it's got 1, 2, 3, and this flattened fifth, which we will change in a minute, because the problem that and it's kind of unavoidable, I think, in the way that they programmed it, is you never really want to spell a scale unless you can't avoid it with a repeated number. And you can see here I've got 2 5s, a flat 5 and a 5. We'll change that in just a second. The app allows us to do that. But that's the only distinction in terms of our interval sets from a major scale. So I'm going to hit generate, and I'm going to address that problem of not wanting to see 2 types of 5s there. I want to see a 4 somewhere, an altered 4. So I'm going to go to notation, and you can see modified note names. And it's this interval here. I want flat 5s to come out as sharp 4s. And there it's done that. Okay, so now all my my interval sets are correct there. So the main characteristic about this, the Lydian mode, is that it's got a sharpened 4th. Okay, everything else is going to be the same. Okay, it's going to have that same characteristics as major, but that sharpened 4th is very distinct. And there's lots of melodies that use this. If you think of The Simpsons, it's got that. But I'll play through some motif, if you like, some theme with that sharpened 4th. What shot should we go back to? We'll go back to the iReal Pro if I can remember which one that was. Was that 3 shot? Yeah, so here I'm going to cut to my Phrygian mode. Lydian mode. And in this case, the chord title that I've put in there is sharp 11. Now, major 7, sharp 11. Okay, 11 is the same as a 4th, just up the register. Okay, so the chord numbering system is another thing to learn to understand when you see things that are not, say on our chart here, we're saying it's a sharp 4. Well, what's that got to do with 11? Well, that's another thing to learn. So 8 and 1 are the same, 9 and 2 are the same, and so forth. So a major 7, that's the type of chord that we're going to get on chords 1 and 4. Okay, but in this case, the characteristic about Lydian mode is that it's got the opportunity to play that, to have that sound of a sharpened 4th in it. So rather than it being like moving to another chord that might amplify that, in this case, I can add it in, and the sonority of that is maybe more common. If I did that with the Phrygian and tried to add its flat 2nd into the chord, or a flat 9 on a minor 7th chord, geez, that's a lot of tension to try and set, and it takes you far away from the sound of a minor chord. Whereas in this case, that sharpened 4th, there's enough musical history, I suppose, to round this sound that when we hear it, it's not controversial. But it's distinct again. Okay, this is in the same style. I'm just going to move the playback feature up there. Okay, so it's from my F. So you can hear it, it's characteristic there. We'll just cut to this the two shot and run through some scale dynamic there, where it was on the fretboard. I think it was that shot. Yeah. Okay, so I'll stick to moving in the same kind of part of the fretboard. Here's my F. My triad at this point is like I did with E. It's the same orientation. It's a major chord. So I've got fifth, root third here. Fifth, root third. And remember, this part of the fretboard is where C major, where we started off with C major. So it's a good place to start learning the scales, because you know that the pattern that you'll be playing hasn't deviated. It's just what interval structures you're thinking of them being, so that you're orientating around this new root center, this new modal center. So in terms of playing this C major scale, I'm thinking of 1 being F and being able to orientate around that. And that's, if you haven't done that before, that can be a frustrating process. If you've got too associated with just thinking around playing a scale around one perspective, being able to start out on different degrees and understand its interval relationships. In this case, it's obvious in that we've got an F chord. Okay, and that's where the notes are, rather than playing here, which we could do. But I'm going to stick to playing here and just kind of run through some of the interval sounds. So I've got this 5, major 7th 1, 3. Sorry, I'll do that again. So 5, 7, 1. There's my 3. That's the sharp 4B. Whether you play at the tone above the minor third, on the same string or on a different string. Okay. Then we've got the 5 above it. So we can hear that modal characteristic. Now, it's a kind of an unusual style again to be able to hear it. Let's just hear it in maybe a more common style for that. Lydian, in terms of a modal thing, you'll hear it in movie soundtracks a lot. If I try and put it in a very ballady sound, so this is kind of quite mushy sound. You might hear it. Obviously, this is not exactly the same, but that's it, putting the major 7th at the bass on that algorithm. So what you'd find with IRO Pro is that on each playing style, it's got a different interpretation to it as to how it's interpreted that chord. And at a certain point on that one, it played the major 7th on this, the 7, which is our E sound. Anyway, moving on, as there's 7 modes to go through, and we're only at 4, and the lesson's cracking on. Let's jump back to our picture-in-picture shot. And we'll go on to our next mode. Okay, right mouse, there we go. So I'm adding another fretboard. And I'm going to name this one. This one's called G Mixolydian. G M-I-X. So there's a Y in it somewhere. O-L-Y D-N. Capital G. G Mixolydian. Let's see if I got the spelling right. So next thing is root select. Again, if you're unfamiliar, wherever it says 2 on the chart above, just whap in 1 on this one. That's us stepping up 1 degree at a time. Or if you know where your notes are, we're just going through the C scale and we're at G at this point. So you'd select wherever G is, or on your whatever instrument you're working on. And we're going to move on from Lydian to use the Mixolydian. Now, did I get the spelling right? M-I-X-O-L-Y-D-I-N. I did. Bonus points to me. Okay. self-congratulate for very simple things. So this is another major scale. So this is our fifth chord, or the fifth degree of our major scale. And we said we had chords 1, 4, and 5 were major. Well, this is another type of major bass scale. And to define that, it's going to have a major third and a perfect fifth. That would define a major type of scale, as opposed to the major scale. In this case, we've got the fifth mode of the major scale, which gives us G mix Lydian. And the only distinction of that is this flat 7. And that's really important because Lydian still had a major 7th, the same as chord 1. And in our triadic structures, 1, 3, 5, 7, that means the chord comes out exactly the same. What I did was to add in something particular from the mode. In this case, well, first of all, we've got that there. I'm going to say just add in the one distinct characteristic that we need to remember about this mode. It's got a flat 7. Everything else is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. Okay, and it's our dominant chord. This is probably the most familiar, along with maybe the natural minor scale, to the ear. Okay, so we've just got, yeah, a flattened 7th in it. So if you were to just play the structure up, between the root and the 5th, or even up to the 6th, you're not going to hear any distinction about the mode. It's all this fact that it's got a major triad and a flattened 7th. It's the only one of the major chords in the major system that has that, this dominant chord. So we shall, just jump back to iReal Pro and look at our backing track. So simple enough, this one. Where's my mix Lydian? Oh, not add it to it. Let's just find it. So in this one, I can go to songs and go MIX OLY IAN. And here's all the different Mixolydian types of scales charts that we've got there, but those are not the ones that I programmed. Maybe I spelt it differently. So what I shall do in this app is just duplicate it. In fact, not that one. Done. I'm just going to duplicate the Dorian and change it to G7, because that's all we need for this as a dominant chord. We'll just change the name of it so I can add it in. And MIXOLYDIAN. And let's put it as a medium blues. Done. Done. Save. And I'm going to add it to my playlist, which I made a new one for these down here. Modes of the major scale. Grand. And let's hit funky. And we'll hear this. And this is going to be very normalized sort of sound. And that's the flat 7 that doesn't sound controversial at all. So I'll cut back to the other shot and we'll just see some of the patterns. We'll just go over the basic and the same kind of scale pattern that we'd gone over. And that was the 3 shot. Oh no, it wasn't. It was that shot. Okay, so we can see it down the bottom there. In this case, my orientation, in terms of if I've learnt the C major scale round here, okay, here's my G, 5th fret of the D string. Wherever that is on your tuning, the diagram should match up with it. And just, I'd suggest just learning a major scale position, your C major in this case, and then trying to play all the other modes around that, and then try and do the same thing elsewhere on the neck. Next position up, what does C major look like? Can you start from the next scale note in it? Yeah. So right now I'm going to, pretty much everything I've done in terms of this shot where I've come back to the diagram is largely just moved around the scale, and the other bits where you've seen me playing with the app, I'm a bit more improvising around in it. But I'm going to try and stick to this one. So my form here is a kind of split form in terms of it. You'll notice that the 1-3-5 here takes me back to the 3rd fret, which was out kind of the scale form. If I try and play G here, I end up going up here, and that's not necessarily a problem. But I get 2 notes on the same string there, or I go up to here for the G, which is maybe up into the next form. So it's the chord shape in itself just spreads you out a bit more in terms of the part. If I just play the scale form, I can just play it the same, which I'll do. So I'll play the same scale form, just sticking from G. So initially from G. Down from there. So there's my 3rd, 5th, 7th root. 3rd, 5th, 7th root. So in terms of my playing here, I'm just trying to stick very strictly to something that's all from that scale. So no approach tones, no anything else. Or things like that. It's an approach tone to F from E, so it's all still diatonic. So you can see that this iReal Pro is very quick to make charts from that you can practice ideas across there. You can practice the arpeggio of the position that you're working on, or you can practice the scale that you're working on, or you can develop the chart on to be moving around more than we are right now. The lesson today is just an introduction to the idea of modes and to see how we can lay them out on the fretboard, on Dobro, GBD. As I say, same process for every other stringed instrument in terms of finding where the layout is. The algorithms do not change. It's just where they're going to be applied on your instrument. Hi Colin, cool app. I missed the name. So the name of the website that I'm using is God, my mind's just gone blank there. guitarscientist.com, and you're wanting to navigate to the guitar, the grid generator or the scale generator, chord chart generator. At the beginning of the video, I'd sort of orientate around the site to it, and then the app that's getting used for playback is iReal Pro. Originally designed to play back sort of jazz charts to stop musicians having to carry big fat reel books. You know, with you carry 4 of those around maybe for a big session, and they're heavy. So this was designed so that rhythm players could just have the chords for it, and then they designed a playback system so it could play back the charts, develop different styles for it. So you can program your own charts to it. It's great for rehearsals, scoring down things in rehearsals, not on bits of paper. If you don't need melodic, that's its limitations. You can't do anything melodic with it. It's all about just keeping a chord chart together, but you can play along with it for practice purposes. Essential. Anyway, cracking on. We shall cut back to picture-in-picture. Oh, we're there already. So we're on to our. So Lydian was mode 5. We're going to go on, add on another fretboard, and we'll look at our next mode. Okay. Bing. Same thing again. take your root select and select whatever 2 was from the previous diagram. In this case, we know it's going to be A, so if you know where A is on your instrument, just click on where that should be. The default selection, in fact, is for this one, as we're working in the key of C and we're on the 6th mode, which is A, it was already selected as 1. Whenever you create a new fretboard, it defaults to 1 being A, or A being 1. So that was already there for that one. And then we're going to go to our scale selector. We're going to go up to this drop-down menu, and we'll select the next scale type, Aeolian. Okay. I'll just type that in here while it's up there. Capital, well, it's Aeolian. Capital A, E-O-L-I-A-N. Okay, and we can see what's going on with this. This is our natural minor scale. So, as I said, there's a few scales that people might get used to and not think of them as modes because they've just learned them in. Well, I know major scale and the minor scale, and you might know something else. But when you hear the words modes, might go, oh well, I don't know what they are, or feel frustrated by those. You've already learnt a mode of the major scale if you've learnt the minor scale. C major, A minor. That's a common thing that people learn at the beginning. Well, that A minor is the 6th mode of the C major scale. That's before you've made any alterations, because sometimes when you've learnt the natural minor scale, you learn the harmonic and then the melodic. So before you've added into those, it's just the natural minor scale, and it's called Aeolian in terms of its mode. These are all Greek names, I believe, from the original. Anyway, this is the natural minor, so I'll just put that in brackets. And its main characteristics is that it's got flat third, okay, flat 6, flat 7. So 3 flats. And this is really the primary minor scale. It's the one that's most referred to, most orientated round as the minor scale. Next to that, I would say, is the Dorian scale, and then less used, but you need to know it, is the Phrygian minor scale. So when I say that, it's like, well, there's going to be pieces that are written in minor or orientate around a minor characteristic, and it's easy to get those wrong. You'll notice there, well, I'll come back and go over them, just hear the sound, and as I play the sound, I'll sort of highlight what I think is a helpful orientation around it. So we just got to hit apply on that. Now that I've selected Aeolian, A is selected there, and we've got our mode laid out on the GBD Dobro. So as we've been doing, I'll cut back to the iReal Pro app, which is this shot, is it? No, that's not. 3 shot. There we go. And I'll go back to my playlist. Modes of the major scale. Oh, I did have mixed Lydian. That was the chart that I made. Or no, I had added it to it. Okay, so here's our Aeolian. Now I've done one thing with this, like I had done with others, is to try and highlight a characteristic of this. Now, you wouldn't necessarily need to do this at all, but I felt I'd do it to really highlight this particular characteristic, specifically in terms of its relationship to Dorian. Dorian's got this major 6th, and this has got a flattened 6. So does Phrygian, but the important characteristic about Phrygian is really the flattened 2nd, the thing that's going to pop your ear out. And if you get that wrong, you're not going to be playing the right scale over Phrygian or chord 3. Anyway, set all that aside, and we'll just go through the playing. So I've just put that in because F is the flattened 6th from it. Okay, A, C, E is 1, 3, 5. F is 6. So I just got 2 beats on beat 3, 4 of the 2nd bar that go to F. To orientate the ear again to that sound. There's lots of other chord progressions I could do, but it would deviate a bit more from it looking just like A minor, like a minor 2-5-1. But that would take us into different modalities, minor modes, and more significantly. So we'll play through this and we'll get the sound, and I'll improvise a little around this. I'll keep it away from the jazzier sounds, as some people just don't like the jazzier sounds, and I think I share it to some bluesy places. So let's have slow-mo. Crack up those repeats. Okay, so A minor. I shall go back to playing around that. Maybe the F was more like, I think when I wrote it I was playing it back at faster times, so faster tempo parts, so that F felt slightly less of an imposition, whereas it felt like it was too much just going to F. Whereas I really just want something that's there for a bit, so at a faster tempo that was doing more what I want. I'd probably change it back just to one beat at the end there for a slow tempo. Anyway, back to this shot. And we'll just go through again in position. I started off there very slowly going around this part of the position. Again, this is where we looked at C major first of all, and it's wise because that's the kind of root orientation right down at the bottom here. So we're in for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So here's our A. Okay, that's where 1 is on this particular chart. Down there. Okay. So I've got 1, flat, 3, 5. There's my arpeggio. There's the 7. Okay. So around that we've obviously got a second there. There's my 4th, 5th, flat 6, flat 7. Okay, so I'll just play around that. Well, first of all, actually, just so you can see how it does it as kind of a little bit of added value, I shall going to edit this chart just so that if I'm playing in the same place, I just felt that this was too soon. Playing at a slow tempo was too much of an imposition. So I'm just going to put that on one beat, on beat 4. You can only program on 3 positions, 1, 2, 3, or 4 in the app, as far as I know. So that will make it slightly less of a big, longer step out. You won't feel obliged to start playing an F chord over it, just because the tempo is so slow. But it'll still be a whole beat, which is a long time at this tempo. So here's our A. I just used an open string there. You'll notice there that did a different thing, because in my haste I just hit F7 rather than F major 7. Now, although that sound was a kind of nice bluesy sound, okay, a dominant chord on the flat 7 of the chord, that's not our diatonic form. This scale pattern would need altered to fit that, and end up having an E flat in it. So I'm just going to go back and make sure that this chord form is not F7, but F major 7. Major 7 can be denoted by triangle 7. In the app you can define whether it says Maj 7 or triangle. I just think default is triangle. Okay. So this bar, it's going to pop in on beat 4. You can hear it just moves a little less imposing now. 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so just jump back to the, essentially I should have had it on there because I'm just really sticking to that position when I was playing there, not a wider improvisation, just really trying to stick to that. So I'll just play a little bit more so that the video's got a clear representation of what I was moving over. There's 1, 3, 5, here's the F. very much playing just up and down the scale there. So we'll move on there, and we'll crack on to the last of our 7 modes. Okay, so we've had our 6th mode there, which was the natural minor mode. We're going to add another fretboard. And again, select B as we're working through the modes of the C major scale, or wherever 2 was on the chart above, or on your, if you're not working on, well, that would be the same if you're working on a different tuning. Wherever on your tuning system you know to have a B, click on it, because that's the 7th mode of the C major scale. Then we're going to click on our scale generator, drop down, and this is the name of our 7th mode, Locrian. Okay? It's over a diminished triad. So this is an often kind of overlooked position of musical orientation for those people that are sort of self-taught or just learning through pop stuff, not necessarily getting a grip on this funny chord 7 business. So here's our scale Locrian. You can see it's got a lot of sharp and flat information on it, and again it's got what we call an enharmonic issue, i.e. something that's got 2 naming structures that are the same, or two notes that orientate around the same name. In this case it's numbers, and I don't want 2 4s. I changed it to talk about from flat 5s to sharp 4s earlier, so it's still got that. But it's all the right information right now. If I refer to this as a flat 5 just now, our mode has got a flat 2, a flat 3, a flat 5, a flat 6, and a flat 7. So the only standard intervals that we're got on it is a 1 and a 4. Everything else is flat. So a lot of dissonant characteristics to it. I'm going to hit apply and then qualify, correct that enharmonic issue. This is really just the way the app works. It has to define one thing or the other. And I changed for the Lydian mode a flat 5 to a sharp 4 earlier. So it's still thinking that. You can see here. So I'm just going to change that back to represent that interval as a flat 5. Now that might have altered my Lydian mode. Yes, it has. So that's a universal for things. So really we want to think of that, the Lydian mode, as a sharp 4, but because of the way this page works, it's either one or the other for all your interval structures. But for this one, for the Locrian, we want to think of it all through flat structures. There's no reason to have, well, it creates a problem if I have a sharp 4 here because I've got perfect 4th already. So we might as well refer to it as a flat 5. So first of all, let's see if I can get the spelling right. Locrian. Okay, and let's name that as B Locrian, 7th mode of the C major scale. Now, did I have? I'm terribly dyslexic. I just forget this all the time. So I'm sure there was an H in this, but they've not got it in there. Anyway, I'll follow their lead with this. Okay, so we've got our very tense, difficult flat 2, flat 3, perfect 4th. But we've got flat 5th, flat 6, and flat 7. Okay, so it's only a 1 and a 2 that have remained kind of diatonic, or within a normal interval structure, or relative to things. Okay. So if I cut back to this, we shall just move on to the Locrian chart here. Now, I'll just a little prequel to what you're seeing there written, or seeing there written. It's the device is over there, but I have to point that way to make it clear the thing. I've written a minor 7 flat 5 chord. Now, I've referred to it being diminished up until this point. Well, that's the triadic structure. If you look at the diagram that we've written there, if I get that back, yeah, you'll notice there, if we just go through the interval structure on the diagram and think of it through looking at the 1, the 3, the 5, and the 7, what we get is 2 minor thirds. Between the root and the third is a minor third. In this case, it's B to D. Okay? and the flat 5 is F, there's B, D, F, that's diminished. It's 2 minor thirds in a row. Okay? But a flat 5 to a flat 7 is 2 tones, not a minor third. That's the point about this chord that makes it slightly complex for one of the basic 4-note chords to describe, because that stops it being diminished. A fully diminished chord is actually what they call a double flat 7. It's a sixth. But in our other minor modes, in the harmonic minor, you'll find the 7th degree being only a minor third above a flattened 5th. That all sounds quite technical to know, but just to qualify that this chord 7 is not fully diminished when you add in the 7th. Okay, it's no longer a fully diminished chord. It's either called half diminished or minor 7 flat 5. Now, minor 7 flat 5 describes explicitly what's going on with that chord. It's just like a minor chord. It's got 1, 3, 5 and a flat 7, except the 5th is flattened. So it's the most clear descriptor of it. Okay? A minor 7 flat 5. Really important when you're working in minor keys. It becomes the chord 2 of a 2-5-1. And I think some of my other videos I've got stuff playing across major and minor 2-5-1s, which will kind of orientate your ear to what the minor 2-5 might sound like. So here I've just got it. Here I've got it just static by itself. As a mode, I don't want it to start like the minor, its use in the minor mode, because we start ending up using the harmonic minor scale in its utility there. So things start altering. Ways in which you can use this, and I've talked about this in other videos, about the relationship between a dominant 9th chord, a minor, like essentially between 2, 5, and 7, those chords, 2 being potentially a minor 6th chord, 5 potentially being a dominant 9th chord, and this chord. Certainly in a kind of R&B flavor, often people will play this type of chord over say you've got a G9 going on, something that's just grooving around that, and say it's a dominant blues, and each chord's got a 9th on it. You can play this on the 3rd degree of a dominant chord, G, B. You can play this triad. So it's got its utilities certainly in a major context. But in this case, we're just going to hear that chord going round and apply the scale over the top of it. So it's got its own idiom, its idiomatic characteristic. Every time I say that word, I'm reminded of John Cleese in the Holy Grail, when he's trying to remember something. What's my idiom? I think it's the anyway. Cracking on. So we're going to hear this. Shall we change the sound a little bit up? Let's try one of these other ones. Let's try Lucille. I can't remember what it sounds like. Inside this, there's a mixer as well that you can change. So I'm just going to take that guitar down. Okay, so there's our sound. Whoopsie daisy. So this is our B half diminished. I'll just spell out the sound first. There's 1, 3, 5, flat 7. So really just playing around the kind of primary forms of that to kind of give you a feel of it. You can hear the sound of it, although it's slightly an unusual characteristic. It's once you've programmed the sound, once you're hearing a minor 7 flat 5 playing the mode over the top of it, the 7th mode of the major scale, is perfectly fine. You've got some tense intervals in it, but the chord holds a lot of tension on it already, so you're already in a tense sounding aspect. In that this one has the tritone. It's got its root B to F, where you invert that either way, is 3 tones apart, and that splits the octave. Either way, it's a sharpened fourth or a flat fifth, no matter which way you count it. So that it's got dissonance in it, is all I'm saying there. You won't find it usually used in this standing context. You will find some tunes that do that. Some jazz stuff does just sit on a dominant chord, and you will find it maybe in an R&B context, a guitarist playing that chord form. But it's generally going to be as a kind of imposed harmony upon a dominant chord. So like you've got a G7 going on in the background. I've got some, but I won't distract myself by trying to do more with that. But you can use that chord structure over, as I say, 2, 5, and 7. This harmonically, this sound works over the top of it. So it's got its utility beyond it just being a mode in itself of a chord, as something that's generally avoided and not necessarily spent time to understand it. It's more common use as part of a chord progression, as I say, would be in a minor. So say we were in A minor, a 2-5-1. Generally, this means it's going to be harmonic minor, and that you might get B half diminished E7 A minor. So as part of a minor turnaround, you get it in that. A minor blues, you'll see it in that, in minor blues a lot. So I think the lesson that I did on the minor blues, you'll see it as a chord there. So there's those 7 modes. Well, we haven't gone through. I'll just go back to the split shot so you can see both necks. Not that one. That bad boy. Okay, so we'll just go through the root structure there. So in this case, B is my root, and it's just a semitone below my C, which is quite helpful. Okay, if I'm going to sort of stick to the C major scale position that we learned. There's my B, so there's my orientation. So I've got 1, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7, 1, 3, flat 5. Now the observant of you might just see a little minor triad there. Okay, it's interrelated to this D minor chord. So as I was saying, there's D minor, but B is our root in this case. Okay, so I'll play the track again and just walk through the scale and see how it sounds, so you can see both in this perspective. 2, 3, 4. I immediately played a C sharp when I didn't mean to. Just playing around with that 1, flat 2, 3, and you can see the flat 2 in that dissonance. It's not like playing a flat 2 over the minor chord in Phrygian. That tension holds it already. The octave. So I'll play down the register a little bit. Same ideas. There's that flat second again. So it's got a lot of tension in that you can play around with. I pretty much playing the notes that aren't in the chord gives you something that's not so difficult. You know, you can step back into one of the chord tones very nicely from it. Just each one's got its own little characteristic. And that's, I suppose, the largest thing for the first step into the modes, is just spending enough time with each one in isolation, getting used to its characteristics, learning what those interval sets mean. So a kind of approach to that, and I'll just cut back to me. So an approach to orientating around the modes that we've looked at there is to think of the kind of three groups of types that we've got. We've got major, minor, and diminished inside the major mode, inside the major scale. Okay, so we've got 1, 4, and 5 as the major orientations, 2, 3, and 6 as the primary minor orientations, and then we've got chord 7, which is this Locrian or half diminished orientation. And it's worth kind of, although the minor and the diminished ones seem like they're a lot closer, it's worth, I think, keeping a grip on those three different characteristics, keeping the minor ones nice and clear together, and then seeing what they relate to each other. So if you know the major scale, 1, all 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, no altered intervals, then the 4th and 5th mode, Lydian and Mixolydian, have just got one interval that's different. The Lydian has a sharpened 4th, and the Mixolydian has a flattened 7th. So there's just one alteration between those scale types. So a good exercise to do that once you've just gone around everything in one key, so everything is diatonic. What I did today was everything in the key of C. So I did chord 1 was C, chord 2 was D, or mode 2 was D, mode 3 was E, mode 4 was F, mode 5 G, and so forth. So an interval, a way to try and get the first process into using these. I'll just refresh this camera. I'll disappear for a second. A way into being dynamic with these and using them is to try and program, say, or work with C major, then C major 7th, then C Lydian, so putting in a sharpened 4th, coming back to C major, and then doing C dominant, C7. So I'll just give a quick example of that. In fact, I'll do it over G in that I've got, let me just see what this loop station, because I was seeing what I've got here. So I think I've got this reggae that is just G. So here is G, okay? Let's see if I've already got 3 shot that will work for this. Yeah. Oh yeah, I just need to move the camera. Sorry about that. Okay, and cut to that shot. So what we're hearing here is G major. So I'm going to try and apply the G major scale, then the 2 other modes that are the major modes, Lydian and Mixolydian. In the backing track, I know because I made it, there's no 7ths in it. Okay, there's no 4ths in it. So I know those harmonic spaces haven't got any problems for me to encounter. So first of all, major. Just get this guitar framed up. And I'll work here. So here's my 1. So 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Back here. Sorry, the 4th. Okay, so that's all the major sound. Now I'm going to try imposing the, so there's no harmonic support for this. I'm going to impose that sharpened 4th, this Lydian sound. So at the first step there, as I just plonked it right in there, and the first time you hear it, it's going to go, that's wonky, that's how. Okay. But we can use that. So you can hear that tonality. Again, there's nothing there to support it, but I can make a different characteristic. I can start implying this different sound, and that's what the modes are all about. Getting used to what these different sounds are, and getting confident in their nature. There are other ones, but the primary ones are ones that you really want to get used to knowing what they sound like, so that you can utilize them when you need them, when you want to make that sound. So the next one, I'm just going to come back to the major scale for a while to kind of refresh our ears just back to something that doesn't have the sharpened fourth, and then we'll move on to the dominant one. So there's that nice basic major scale with a perfect fourth. There's 5, 4, 3, 1, 7, 6. So that's kind of cleansed our ear, if you like, back to normal. Now I'm going to start superimposing this flat 7. It's got a very familiar, just stop that for a second, it's got a very familiar characteristic to it. It's suddenly slightly more bluesy, isn't it? It's got this flat 7 in it. Dominant chord, sorry, major triad with a flat 7. And let me just hang up this phone call. Sorry, Tam. So it's got this flat 7th in it, and you know that's immediately more, as you can see, that mode is more familiar to your ear, probably. That sound of a flattened 7th, okay? But that tells you something. You're going, oh well, if you've not kind of qualified that for yourself, what the sound of a major chord with a flattened 7th is. And you start hearing, once you've identified them, you start hearing them in types of music. So you might hear it at the beginning of a blues. I know this isn't blues, but let's play it along and we'll hear it. So I'm going to play a few bars of major 7th and then dominant 7th that would usually carry on to chord 4. That ba ba that would usually go to chord 4, so chord 1. Sorry, I played the flat 7th there. Okay, so that's a very, very important one, the dominant 7th, used to, in terms of it's got far more, a whole pile of theory around it about its function, a dominant 7th. How it gets used is integral, really. A dominant chord 5 used to resolve to somewhere. But it's an introduction to going, all right, when you hear something that's obviously moving characteristic, you'll hear this in lots of blues guitar solos, something that's playing major pentatonic, or playing the minor pentatonic based on the 5th degree of the scale, and then, or rather the other way around, major pentatonic, then playing the minor pentatonic based on the 5th degree of the scale. Something that suddenly has a dominant characteristic to it from not. Other characteristic would obviously moving between major and minor pentatonics over the top of something. So, like this. So I'm going to play G major here. Major pentatonic. Minor pentatonic. So you heard two different modal sounds. The idea of modes just being characters of sound. Well, how are we going to know what those characters of sound are without a little sort of detailed exploration? Now, some people will find these intuitively by ear and will have their own relationship to them. We're not all blessed with that wonderful intuitive skill, so we rely on, or the path to getting there is supported by understanding the interval structures of them and knowing how they might sound. And I'd suggest what I've really found of value over the years is practicing them in isolation, so you get to know what these flavors are. Then when you're listening to music, they mean something. When you hear something, you can go, I know what that sound is doing. I know what that harmonic characteristic is. And that supports your ability to then use them confidently in your playing. So that's really our lesson today. It was the 7 modes of the major scale. What's implicit in that? I say implicit. What's implied in that is that there's also modes of the minor scale, not the natural minor scale. If it was modes of the natural minor scale, they end up being the same. Just the same sounds, same notes. What happens in the minor is we get harmonic minor. The 7th degree of that scale in the key of A minor, G becomes G sharp. And that alters all our potential chord patterns in it, and most particularly our scale sound in it. So there's a more sophisticated kind of utility of stuff that moves off in minor harmony in application of it. So hopefully you found that of interest to you. Thanks to those of you that have tuned in to watch live. Do like the page, follow the page, whatever you can do, and share the video if you know anyone that's going to find this helpful. I do think the way that I'm working with it, coming from teaching guitar, the process here, although I'm obviously playing the dobro for it, the process that I'm applying to it is the same for every instrument. Now the Guitar Scientist page, the diagrams themselves will be different for whatever instrument you're working on. But certainly the idea of ingesting the sound, I think, is the way that I'm working with it is applicable to anyone's ear, really. Because it's about getting used to the intervals and characteristics of sound. Some instruments have a certain type of more idiomatic repertoire for maybe some of them. But let's not get bogged down in that. If you've got any further questions, do drop me a line and get in touch. Do check out my Patreon page. There's a pile of free stuff there, as well as more content that I'm trying to produce through the period of time that I have right now to buckle down and create content. So I think I shall leave it at that. So hopefully this has been of value. Until next time, this is Gavin Taylor for GT Dobro Lessons Online, signing out. Goodbye.